All right. So today we had Jessica Lawrence-Vaca, who is a member of our board. She is the Chief Commercial Officer for Array Technologies based in Albuquerque, I believe.
Yep.
We had a terrific conversation with her about, what Array does and kind of looking at the approach that their company is taking to the political landscape, how they're preparing for 2025, and thinking about opportunity to continue to expand their business in the United States.
Yeah, she had a lot of interesting things to say about kind of the preparation that her company has done all year and in past years to sort of prepare for this political transition, and a lot of interesting things to say about how our industry can show up and meet this moment, and then also a lot of sort of pearls of wisdom about kind of leadership and what her own perspective is on how she's shown up to these kinds of spaces and where we can go from here. So it's fun.
Yeah. I totally love her optimism.
Yeah.
It's what the industry needs to hear right now.
Totally.
That the leaders in the space are not scared.
Yeah.
Right. The solar industry grew under the first Trump administration. It will continue to grow under the second Trump administration. Demand is clear.
Yep.
Demand for solar is clear, and business is good. So I think it'll be a really interesting thing for our listeners to get a hold of today.
Yeah, absolutely, and lots of good nuggets about sort of how we tell authentic stories. So, hope you enjoy. We're nearing the end of 2024. When you think back on this year, what is your sort of perspective as a company, like as a business? What's your story of the year as Array Technologies, knowing that maybe that changed a little bit a month ago, but on the whole, what are your sort of perspectives on this year?
I came into that, so I actually have a great perspective on a full year because I started at Array in January of this year. So it's really interesting to kind of look back and see where we started and where we've come. And I think, overall it was really interesting for me personally and professionally to go, after having worked really hard on the IRA and the 45X manufacturing tax credits, to go work for a manufacturer. So that I think has been really particularly exciting this year. We broke ground on our manufacturing facility in New Mexico. We decided, with all of the, being an Albuquerque, New Mexico first-based company, we wanted to stay there. We wanted to grow and expand our footprint. So we're tripling the size of our facility. And we actually just broke ground, really, really broke ground on it, I think last month. So we're looking for Q4 of next year for things to be finalized, and I think an opening in Q1 of 26. Which we're super excited about. Employment's going to be around 300 people, and created a better facility, the flexibility to manufacture different types of components, and are just really kind of excited about that growth opportunity as a company. And having been kind of one of the OGs in the industry, we've been around for 30 years. I think that's kind of just a real hallmark moment of what the IRA has been able to bring to our company and then across the U.S. So, I think we experienced a lot of similar things that a lot of other companies and manufacturers did, some push outs, some, nervousness around tariffs, the election, different things. But I think we're really, I think that we're positive about next year and about, American manufacturing and being an American manufacturing success story. And so I think, we're looking at 2025 as a growth year, actually, for us based on what our outlook looks like.
Before we get into the weeds on where we go from here, can you just sort of give our listeners a sense of the impact the IRA has had on Array over the last 5 years? Basically, you mentioned that the company's been around for 30 years. Did we see a hockey stick trajectory in Array's capabilities more recently as a result of that? Or do you feel like the growth has been pretty steady?
I think that we've definitely seen growth. Obviously, I don't think without the tax credits and the 45X benefits. So, I mean, obviously, a market to sell into and people to buy our products, we would not have potentially chosen to actually expand and triple the size of our facility. That was like no small thing. We've grown. We've seen our supply chain in the U.S. grow because we had, the majority of our supply chain here already, but with the few things that were not here, we've brought into the U.S. So we're expecting to be, 100%, domestic content capable by mid next year at the very latest. Which we're super excited and proud of. So we've actually seen our supply chain and our downstream supply chain has grown as a result of the IRA. So our supply chain, we've grown as a company. Our outlook has grown. Our customer base has grown. So I think just, as we're looking, for the outlook, the IRA has definitely had an impact on our bottom line and what we've seen, how that's filtered down to the companies that we also work with. So we're really excited about that. I think we put together a video a couple of weeks ago with one of our supply chain partners that we posted on LinkedIn, Lockjoint Tube. They're based, one of their manufacturing facilities is in South Bend, Indiana, which is very close to a project that we were doing with a developer partner of ours. And it was just so kind of exciting to see the ecosystem of that, we worked with this one partner who then, we purchased tubes from Lockjoint. The Lockjoint facility was 10 miles away from where they were actually being deployed so that the people at the facility were being, impacted. The community was being impacted. Like you really see that ecosystem growing. And like that's all a result of the IRA, that, their growth and the opportunity. So I think that's something that's really cool.
Yeah, and bringing that to places all across the country, places in Indiana.
Yeah, it's just one example of like hundreds of examples, really cool. And part of stories that we've been trying to tell.
Yeah, it's central to our entire strategy, right? At the end of the day, the work that companies like Array and a lot of our other members are doing are very fundamentally creating jobs for people all over the United States, and that is huge economic impact. Not just locally, but nationally. And it's amazing to see what your company's been able to do. I wondered if we should pivot to how, given the election, given, how the political landscape is changing, how does a company like Array prepare for a time like this? Risk modeling and supply chain issues. How do can you walk us through kind of what that process looks like?
So we're actually doing prep for our board meeting right now. Obviously, so our earnings call was 2 days after the election, so we had a lot of blank, TBD. Notes in there. But, listen, we've spent the last year preparing for this, with SIA, with our other, trade association partners and industry partners, where we all said, okay, we got to plan for best case, worst case scenario and everything in between. And so, we made sure with SIA that we were participating in several industry trade associations, that we were going to the Hill. We hired somebody to manage our government affairs here in DC. We make sure that we have a bipartisan lobbying firm so that we could prepare to ensure that we had all the relationships that were necessary. We've spent a lot of time with SIA on Capitol Hill educating members about the benefits that our manufacturers bring. We brought our suppliers to the Hill. Lockjoint was one of those in particular that I was just talking about, and went to meet with all of their members. We brought our chief supply chain officer in to talk about what he was seeing in the supply chain. So it's really been kind of a whole of company approach where we've been working. I've been working really closely with our, legal team to understand, how 45X and those benefits were impacting us, across the company, and with our chief supply chain officer, how we were going to be able to meet the domestic content requirements, all of those different things. So it's not hard, I guess, when you're already talking to all of the different people to then go back and say, okay, well, now we need to plan for kind of all these different scenarios. But I guess I would just say a couple of things. One, when you look at all of the big, when you look at the electricity needs across the country over the next 10 years, when you look at all of the public utilities and all of, what they're talking about in their 10-year plans, so many of them are transitioning to renewables or have it as part of a healthy mix. And when we look at the demand growth for, not to mention just electricity generally, but with data centers, with manufacturing, solar is going to remain probably the cheapest and the easiest to permit for a while. I mean, we all have permitting problems and things like that, but the trajectory is still there. It might look a little bit different, and I think that there's probably going to be a bumpy road. I've been in the industry for 12 years now, and I feel like it's not anything that we haven't seen before. But, I guess I'm cautiously optimistic. The House and the Senate are very evenly divided. We have 14 of the 18 GOP members that signed the Garbarino letter that are coming back. So much of these investments, as you guys both know, have been made in Republican districts. We're trying to, I know that the industry, and we are as well, going back, and I went through this exercise yesterday with our lobbyists, like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Well, nothing's really been put on the table yet. We're trying to go back and think about, well, who said what to who, and, tracking who is, at some point over the last couple of years, put these things on the table. But then I guess we also don't want to negotiate with ourselves. And so I think, again, being prepared for every scenario, but I think also we've done a lot to educate House members and senators. We're going to need to do a lot to educate the administration. I think that we've been doing that, but we're just going to have to keep telling the story and keep talking about how that, how that waterfall effect works, where it's the developer hitting the EPC, hitting the manufacturers, that then the jobs in the communities that are impacting the community tax base, and that's funding, rural schools and, first responders and all of these different things. So making sure that we're connecting all of those dots. And I think finally, I would say that, our industry did grow under the last Trump administration, actually by quite a bit. And so I'm holding that as, if you lay all the facts out on the table, it's all right, we can, there's opportunity here. We can do this.
You talked a lot about some of the storytelling that you have done, and that many others in the industry have done, particularly trying to sort of build those bridges across the aisle. Do you feel like it's resonating? Do you feel like it's working? I feel like we have seen a lot of really strong support from, Congressman Garbarino that you mentioned and others, but when you're in those conversations, do you feel like it's landing? Is this becoming more of a understood as a bipartisan issue? I
think, as we've always done, you have to tailor your message to whoever you're talking to, right? And I spent, before I came to renewables, I spent 15 years of my life working in foreign policy and national security. So for me, energy security as national security is, I think, a really important message. Energy security as national security, as job security, as supply chain security, and tying all of those messages together. And at the end of the day, as we saw that this last election really came down to economic issues and what are people talking about around the kitchen table. These members all care about that too. And if you're able to tie, what you're doing in their community to, hey, you were able to get this much more funding for your school board or for your schools, as far as, in taxes, or for your local community. And I'm, our company, because of this, and this, we're employing this many people, this many people are working in this factory. This factory was opened. I think if you make it about the very, very, very local issues, then I do feel like it's landing better. And, I think that we need to just, again, if this election taught us anything, like we need to get back to, I think, the grassroots of what this really means for people at home. And I think telling those stories, like how this is, like we did with Lockjoint, like these tubes are manufactured 10 miles from where a bunch of your, local community members are employed, putting them into the ground on this job site. And I think people, members need to hear that, local communities need to hear that. And when you're putting like all of that together and tying it together for them, I think that it is landing. And honestly, like we don't need it to land with everybody. Like there's some people we're just never going to turn around, but it needs to land with enough people. And, I think that that's going to make the difference. And we need to not be afraid to talk to people about it too. I mean, I've lobbied on some issues during my career that were like not amazing issues to go lobby on. This is much better. And like, you just need to go in and tell your story and like not be afraid to tell people your story.
You mentioned your background in sort of national security and foreign policy, and you have kind of a particular background and interest in the trade realm in your time in the solar industry in particular. It is no secret that President Trump and his administration is sort of fond of trade measures and tariffs and trade actions. What kinds of expectations do you have? What moving down Pennsylvania Avenue away from Congress and thinking about sort of the Trump administration and trade policy, what sorts of tactics are you thinking about to sort of protect the wins that you've made and some of the risks that you might be seeing in the future?
Listen, I think as a company, just for us, I think we're pretty well positioned. I mean, we heavily manufacture in the U.S., but again, broader tariffs are problematic for the industry because if the industry slows down, then we then also are going to slow down. Like nobody's really insulated. So, I mean, I think, I've been talking to a lot of folks and, I think we can probably expect that there's going to be broad tariffs on Chinese goods on day one. Everything that I've been hearing around Mexico and Canada is that was kind of a strong negotiating tool to try and get people to the table. So, I mean, we're watching that closely, but that, could be a little more debatable. And I think that, I think that we're still just trying to figure out like what it's going to look like, right? Because they've been saying some things. There's nothing written in stone. Like, there's a lot to navigate there. And we're already navigating through all this like AD/CVD stuff right now. So, I mean, I think, this is the same as what I was talking about before. Like, this is also telling a story about, the industry and all of the different connections. I think it sounds like we're probably definitely going to have to deal with, foreign entities of concern. So that's probably something we're going to have to look at. There's like some buckets of things that I think we need to be conscious of as an industry. But again, we've been doing that work for years now, between all of the different like AD/CVDs that we've had and circumvention and UFLPA and all of these different things. So I feel like we've made good strides. And again, it's just going to be telling that story and then trying to come up with strategies so that the industry is not targeted more than other industries as we sometimes have been in the past. So, I mean, I think that there's still so much yet to be determined that, I feel like we're a little bit in a wait and see mode. But, again, I mean, I feel like our company is well positioned. But for me, if the whole industry isn't working well, and if the tariffs are impacting the whole industry, and that also impacts us. So it's kind of like you've got to have to find a balance.
Well, and I think that your story as a company speaks to how aligned in reality we are in terms of outcomes with this administration. We want more manufacturing. We want more manufacturing jobs. We want more U.S. products. We want, all of those things. I think, you point to what we're trying to achieve, and maybe the tactics and the trade measures and some of the ways that different administrations go about these efforts. We can debate on those tactics, but I do think there's a lot of alignment on what we can provide and what we can offer as an industry and what they're trying to solve for.
I mean, there's definitely things that we, because of 45X and because of domestic content, so that we can meet the requirements that our customers are asking us to meet. Like we've onshored, several different items that we, had not been manufactured here by anybody, frankly, for years. And so, we're onshoring those items, and we're super pumped about that. And, we've had a really great, U.S., low carbon steel supply chain for years. But I think that you're totally right. Like, we are very aligned with this administration on, on jobs, on U.S. manufacturing, on American made, on, clean energy is secure energy, all of these different types of things. And so I think just making sure that we're messaging all that in the right way, I think is going to be really critical.
Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest takeaway for me and what you're articulating to us is that Array has come a long way in demonstrating how other companies, aimed to build a bridge from where we were to where we needed to be now. And with our Solar Market Insight report coming out tomorrow, you're going to see just how close we are to, producing enough supply here in the U.S. to meet demand for deployment. And those numbers are hugely impactful. We're not going to turn back time on that progress at this point. And the fact that Array's been able to do that already is super impressive. And it speaks to your senior leadership and your ability to run a strong, financially sound company, no matter what, sort of political landscape we're facing here in the U.S. On a separate issue, before we let you go, I want to talk a little bit about women in leadership in the solar industry.
Fun.
You have been a huge influence on the solar industry in terms of your leadership. Working so closely with our CEO, Abby Hopper. Just tell us what you've seen over the last 5 years, right? Tell us the difference in what the sort of demographic breakdown of the industry is, and it looks like then and now, and how it's sort of changing, and the role that women can play in building this industry up. We're just getting started.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And it was purely by accident that I got involved in the industry anyways. And then I came from an industry that was like very heavily male dominated. So it's just been what I've been used to. But I remember when I first joined the board as an alternate, and I want to say that it was in 2018 probably. I remember sitting next to another female colleague, and like we would count around the table like how many other women were sitting there. And I want to say that it was like maybe 4 or 5 of a board of like 35 or 40 people. And not to mention like people of color as well, because there were like hardly any of those as well. So to just look around now and to see at like the highest levels, how many more women, people of color, are not only on the board, but in leadership positions on the board, on the executive committee. And I think that that's a testament to Abby's leadership, and then to the companies who I think, when she started to shine a light on the fact that like, hey, we need more diversity. Look at SIA, like we're bringing more diversity to SIA. And then, SIA really pushing a DEI like working group and people getting involved and then talking amongst themselves about like how do we implement this across companies and across the industry. It has been just like in organizations like Rise, that I'm the DC co-chair of the chapter with Carla Loeb, and just like making sure that, you know, there's always other women that are like coming in that are along for the ride that you're mentoring, like being very intentional about, you know, who you're looking at to hire, like being very intentional. And I've been very intentional with my own team in, you know, coming in recently and being like, we need to be more reflective of what this industry is looking like, and we need to lead the way. So that's been really important to me. And then I've always had mentors, and I wouldn't say that I've had a ton of like female mentors, which I wish that I had had. But as I've gotten older, I've had female mentor friends. Like Abby's totally one of my best friends and a mentor. She and I get together and talk, you know, probably like once a month or once every 2 months and have coffee. And it's like, what's going on? Like, how are you dealing with these situations? Like, you know, I mean, because I'm in a new role and in a leadership role where it's a lonely place sometimes. And especially if you're the only female on the team. And so having somebody that I can go to just bounce ideas off of, you know, what would you do in this situation? And so I think, you know, over the last probably 5 years in the solar industry, and it really started around COVID, where there was a little group of us that like kind of came together and just tried to survive together. And, you know, all of us were in different companies and in varying positions, and like just trying to talk through like what was happening in work and life and all of these things. And, you know, I think as Abby has said, that's kind of like what the Solar Sisters kind of spun out of. But I just think it's really important to be intentional about, you know, bringing people along and making space for people and like caring about people and like caring about your team. And I'm just so excited, like the change that I've seen over the last 12 years in the industry. It's such a, just such a brighter place because there's so many more people from all different walks of life. And I think that that's something that we should really pat ourselves on the back for. Like, it's just very reflective and inclusive of like what we want to be. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, RE Plus is a place where I've noticed, particularly with the younger generation showing up saying like, wow, this is such an amazing event. You know, looking around, I wish there were more people who look like me here, whether it's gender-based or race-based, or otherwise. And it's been really interesting to see that sort of feedback, but at the same time watching the change and leadership in the space and how important it is to show up. Abby's certainly very vocal about that. You're very vocal about that. And like you said, that small group of women in leadership roles is super important to make sure that the younger generation feels inspired and feels welcome to come in and not just apply for jobs in the solar industry, but start companies. Right? There's so much opportunity to get in right now, no matter what, even now. So it's fun to see you play such an important leadership role for the younger generation.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I like to connect people, and I like to be real with people. And I mean, you guys know, like, I'm a mom. I have 4 kids. You know, I travel all the time. I have an amazing husband who's a great partner and who, you know, does all the things while I'm gone, but it takes a village. And, you know, you and I have talked about this. I have a constant laundry list in my head of like all of the things that I'm not doing or that need to get done or that I'm not doing well enough. And, you know, I mean, I think sometimes just like not feeling like talking to other people about it and like allowing yourself and others to like not feel so alone that like this is part of like the journey and like you're not going to be able to do all things like well all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we've evolved as not just an industry, but I feel like we're starting to evolve a bit as like a professional culture where like that's more acceptable to like talk about all of those things. And I think just there's like so many things from like being a mom to like professionally that I feel like nobody told me or people didn't want to talk about or, you know, whatever. And when you talk about it now, it's like, oh gosh, I'm so glad that you're telling me that, or I'm so glad that you feel that way because I feel that way too.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Abby so much because I feel like she really leads the way in that space of being very just open and honest with people. And it, as she said, like it resonates with everybody. It resonates with, you know, moms, dads, grandparents, caretakers, whatever it is of like, this is who I am and this is what I'm struggling with and this is all of the things that I'm doing. And I mean, I feel like we need more people in the industry and like in, you know, in the workforce generally like that, who lead in the same way that she does and that I try and emulate because it's amazing.
Yep.
I feel like it ties back to what you said earlier about the, you know, kind of going back to our roots a little bit and relying on sort of the grassroots impact that we have as an industry and what we're trying to accomplish. That like when you show up authentically and you have these kinds of conversations where it's not just like about electricity and you know supply chains, but it's about, you know, the impact that the work you're doing has on you as a person and how you show up as a leader and as a, you know, a member of this industry. I think those kinds of things do tend to have ripple effects and get us to conversations that can be more authentic with people that might not know as much about what we're doing. And I feel like I've seen that change in the industry in the time that I've been around, just sort of noticing that, you know, some of those like informal and authentic connections and conversations can actually result in better stories and better outcomes.
Listen, we all have friends who have different beliefs than us, right? But like you can always find common ground, I feel like, around friends, family, kids, like, you know, those types of things. And I feel like that's where, you know, we find common ground in the grassroots of like how you're impacting families, how you're impacting people's, you know, children, making people's lives better, putting food on the table, impacting communities. And, you know, that's how I like to personally connect with people. And I think it's made me a better lobbyist. It's now making me a better, you know, sales and commercial person, to find common ground with people. And I think that's where we're going to be able to make an impact and to make a difference, is to finding the personal connections and then, you know, layering in the good stuff.
And the nerdy details of,
all the weeds.
Yeah, all the stuff.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you want to make sure we talk about before we close today? Anything else you want to get in?
Final message.
What do you want our listeners to know?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there's probably a lot of people out there that are really, you know, worried, concerned about like what this next year is going to look like. And, you know, we've seen this rodeo before. We did okay the last time. And, you know, just, I think, buckle in, make sure that we've got the right messages, the right messengers, you know, who's the right audience, where do we meet audiences that we need to target where they are, and, you know, being okay tinkering with our message to make sure that it hits the right way. And, you know, again, as like sort of former kind of present national security hawk, like what, I mean, energy security, economic security, national security, like we are actually helping to guarantee like our economic future, as you were saying earlier. When I first started in this industry, we were a net exporter of solar goods, and we're on our way there. I mean, I think I read something earlier that we're like the third largest producer right now of modules in the world. We're on our way there. We should be so freaking proud of that. We should be so proud of like what we're building and like building ourselves again as a manufacturing powerhouse. And so we just need to carry those messages. Like, it shouldn't matter what we're manufacturing. We are manufacturing. We are manufacturing, and we're making our nation more economically and more like, defensively secure. So
absolutely.
That would be my message, is that, I mean, I think we have good story to tell, good energy to spread. So
nice.
So you like that messaging?
Good plug.
You like that? Good plug.
And that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.